Hi folks, Adrian here. We were having some audio issues with the house audio coming into the camera, so we had to go ambient on this, so sorry for any background noise. Audio for the actual talk from Dave Kennedy should start at about the 1 minute 13-second mark.
Popularity, and let's just do a really quick round of applause for everybody that makes BSides Cleveland possible. As you know, organizing events can be a very challenging thing. DerbyCon last year, this year, so hopefully, anybody here going to DerbyCon this last year? Does anybody not have a ticket and going to LobbyCon? I got a few. Don't worry, you'll get tickets towards the end of it, but just show up and believe it, you're not going to be turned out at the door. So. But appreciate everybody coming out today to hear me talk. This talk to me is a really important one because it's common things that I see kind of across the industry and in general around the 5 things to me that are the most important. And some of this might be news to you, some of it might be new, but it's something that is near and dear to my heart when it comes to information security and kind of everything that we're doing here. But it's awesome to see BSides in Cleveland just prosper and continue to get awesome. Every year I get to come here. Now, unfortunately, I don't get to stay very long. I'm actually have a family reunion today that I'm skipping right now. So I actually have family members that are like, hey, where's, it's at my house. And I'm not there. So I'm actually here with my first family first, and then I got a second family, which is my real family, that I got to be at here a little bit. So, just a brief introduction myself. Dave Kennedy, I'm founder and CEO of Trusted Second Binary Defense. I've been in the security industry for a number of years. Yada yada yada. I'll keep going on. All right. So, if you look at the 5 things that are most important to me, I think it's important to understand that as an industry, we're still very new. I mean, you could say, hey, we've grown from the 50s and 60s and 70s and everything else. But you look at the industry itself, and my era, kind of growing up in the 90s and the BBS days and everything else, we were still a relatively new industry when it came to that. And there's a lot of talk right now around industry and community and everything else and what that means. But in the beginning, we're still finding a lot of ways to figure out what we're dealing with in security. Technology moves very quickly in a number of different ways, and it's up to us to kind of figure out the best way to pay forward and things to do differently. I still haven't been replaced by artificial intelligence or machine learning yet, so that's a good thing. We're still solid as far as being people and being able to identify threats and go after targets, but things that definitely happening out there. But here's the top 5 things. First and foremost, before I get into number 1, it's easy as an industry to say everything's broken. If you go to Twitter, you log in, which I don't recommend, it's not good for your health. Try to stay away from Twitter as much as possible. But if you log into Twitter, you get a perception that everything's broken. That as an industry that we're not doing enough to secure ourselves. That technology is moving too fast that we can't keep up with it. That as an organization, or as organizations are out there, that we're all broken and that we're not doing what we can around security. The truth of the matter is that over the past 10 years, it's night and day to where we've come from security to where we are now. I remember going into an organization, doing penetration testing, because that was what everybody needed at the time, right? We'd come in, we'd smash a company, we'd break into everything, we'd walk out, we'd do the same thing next year, and year after year after year, it continued to happen. And it was pretty much the same way of breaking into one company as it was before in that year to the next year to the next year to the next year, because of the cyclical effect that we saw. And so I remember using like MS-0867 on an organization that had it for 7 years. And there's still ones out there quite often that still have MS-0867, and still have WannaCry, and still have a lot of other areas there. But as a whole, it's becoming substantially harder for us as attackers to break into organizations across the board. It's not just one company or 2 companies or 3 companies doing a better job, it's a lot of companies. And the reason for that isn't because we've gotten better at prevention. The reason for that is we've started to invest and understand that we need visibility in people. And I think that's a big difference today of, hey, we need to understand how attackers are compromising organizations and how to respond to those specific things than it is anything else. And it's interesting to see because as an industry, we are getting better. As an industry, there's new things coming out that we're doing that make things a lot more different. And I always like to use the analogy that 10 years ago, we really tried to be this castle mentality, right? We like to have heavily fortified walls and archers and knights and moats and everything else. And now, in today's age, we literally have a bunch of tents and a bunch of lines in a row with no one patrolling the streets. And it's very difficult for us to get a handle on that, but we're doing a better job at trying to understand that and how to build things better. So the number one thing for me that I see commonly across this industry, I think it's a little loose, that's why. If I hold it, it's fine. You didn't test this before, Jason?
This is my show.
Jeez, gosh. He's the one that runs AV at DerbyCon, so...
Not here.
Not here, yeah, I gotcha. So number one thing that I typically see in most organizations is the basics. And the basics today are still kicking our butts. And it's tough to do basics. Does anybody here not struggle with passwords in their environment? Anybody? No? Okay. Passwords still tend to be the biggest area here. And even things like two-factor authentication. If you look at, let's just say 10 years ago, you look at what RSA was trying to implement with the secure IDs and the key fobs, great concept, right? You actually have to have a physical device, and you actually have to enter that physical device into a location that you control, right? And you go to that specific site to go and do it. Today, we try to do ease of use, and everybody has a mobile device, so we have awesome things like SMS messages and things like that. And we also try to make things a lot easier with push notifications and ways that we can be less of a burden on our IT staff. Now, I like this story because it hits home, and I was doing a pen test, and I built a social engineer attack against this organization. So it was against two people. So I had one person in sales, because sales clicks on everything, and then I had one person in IT, in case I got lucky, and I was able to get code execution onto that person's system. And one thing I focused on is for code execution was a few different ways of delivering through email, as well as trying to harvest passwords. And so I sent a message to this person in IT, and I sent the person to this message in sales, and I spent probably a good 3 or 4 days building out this pretext. Individual off of them. I did open source intelligence, I was looking at what they were doing, I built pretext directly off of them, sites directly off of them, reputation, domain fronting, I had the whole thing set up, and I was like, this is going to be an awesome hack, this is going to be one that I'm really proud of and I can tell a story about and everything else. And I fish them, and I get their username and passwords, but I don't get code execution, which sucks. I'm like, oh, that sucks. I thought I had something pretty decent here, but I got snagged and didn't get to them. But I did get usernames and passwords. And so when I got their username and password, I go to log into their VPN concentrator. And normally, I can test to see if there's two-factor, because when you log in with into a VPN concentrator, you usually get a prompt. Do you want to run a push notification, a text message? Usually there's a few different options, or a phone call to call you up on the phone. And so I can usually tell what two-factor authentication is, and then I can build another pretext to hopefully get that two-factor. And by the way, if you don't know, a lot of adversaries and organized crime are leveraging hijacking of two-factor authentication as well. The way that they do this is that they control the flow of what the user experiences and sees. So they know that you're leveraging Duo or Cisco or whatever it ends up being for two-factor authentication. And what they do is they phish you. They enter in the username and password in a malicious site, because they coax the victim into doing that. And then they have a two-factor authentication prompt, and they initiate the two-factor authentication prompt from a different computer, or within that same session. And then from there, the user enters in their two-factor authentication credential, and it's seamless. There's a lot of automation around that too. So two-factor is now becoming a little bit of a trouble. But anyways, in the specific phish, I get the username and password, and I go to log in, and it automatically says, hey, we're pushing to your mobile device right now to verify who you are, automatically, because they save the preferences of that individual's preference. So it was doing a push notification to this individual. And I'm like, oh man, there goes my entire pretext. And it was the IT guy as well. I was like, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to have full access to this IT guy's infrastructure and everything else, and blah, blah, blah. And it does push notification. I'm like, well, that's weird. That sucks. I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm going to have to burn down my entire infrastructure. So at this point, I go to get a glass of whiskey, because it's going to be a long night, right? I got to redo my whole infrastructure. I got to do OSINT. Might as well do it while enjoying some whiskey. And I go to get a bottle of whiskey, and I come back and I sit back down at my desk, and I'm logged in. Well, that's weird. And I'm like, something's wrong. I must have timed out, and I'm really in like a area where I may have to like authenticate again or something like that. and I'm wide open in the entire internal network. I'm like, that's really weird. I'm like, well, maybe there was an issue with like the technology, how they implemented it. Maybe if you actually wait and there's a timeout, it automatically logs you in. It's like a big bug, and I'm gonna have a big bug on this one. I can find it out and everything. And it turns out that the IT guy thought he was logging in from one of his systems somewhere and hit approve, right? And that's an IT person. It's amazing, right? And that's the basics. Like that's like literally going after a human to hit accept because he thinks he's logging in, he or she is logging in from somewhere. Some things, by the way, for two-factor authentication, especially when it comes to prompt notifications, is it uses the general location of where you're at. So by the way, if you look at the corporate headquarters and where they're located at, or you go to LinkedIn and see the locations that they're logging in from, VPNing into a location that's near that location in some way, shape, or form, and it pops up, let's just say they're from Austin, Texas. It pops up and says, hey, are you logging in from Austin, Texas? Things that you can do to make it much more believable as an attacker are things that we commonly see often today. So the basics really seem to be a problem, and that's an education awareness problem. That's also how we implement two-factor authentication. But those are things that we can definitely get better at. I mean, passwords today, passwords need to die in a burning fire. Let's just be perfectly honest. Like 100%, get rid of passwords completely, in every way, shape, or form. It's not going to get any better. Education awareness isn't going to fix people from making predictable passwords. Good example is I cracked a 37-character password the other day. 37 characters. It's impossible, right? Computationally, that's impossible, right? We have 8 GTX. We have 8 1080 Ti's. We have 2 Titan X's, and we just ordered 8 more 1080 Ti's, and then 4 more 2080 Ti's for cracking, right? So we're not a green company in any way, by the way. It's funny, I'm just waiting for the government to be like, hey, you have a big underground marijuana ring here, don't you, for all the electricity that we're taking up for this. But what's interesting about the GPU crackers is that I cracked that 30-plus character password in about 17 minutes. And can anybody guess what the password was? It was meow.meow.meow.meow.meow.meow. Really complex, right? And obviously the person really liked cats. Nothing wrong with that. Cats are awesome. But it's interesting because even when we try to implement complex passwords, predictable sequences and analysis really bites us when it comes to those passwords to go away in a fire. Some basics that make a huge difference. Prevention to me takes a lot of time, right? Can anybody here make sweeping changes across their organization immediately within day one, or across the entire environment without testing? Probably not. But there are a lot of great things that prevention-wise can do some big. It can have some major differences. I'm a huge fan of PowerShell. I actually gave the very first ever with a good buddy of mine, Josh Kelly, at DEF CON. It's like 10 years ago. I'm getting old. But it was the very first ever PowerShell security talk. It's when PowerShell beta first came out, and they're talking about integrating it into operating systems. And I'm like, hey, this is really cool. Hey, this is really dangerous. Hey, this is going to be used like really bad in the future. And lo and behold, it actually worked. It happened. But with PowerShell, especially with version 6 and soon to be PowerShell version 7, there's a lot of great integration and things that you can do with PowerShell. Most specifically, if you're not familiar with Windows 10, Windows 10 implements what's called the Anti-Malware Scan Interface, or AMSI. And there's some good features with that. I think you'll see here in a little bit of my talk that it's not as good as we want it to be. It's still pretty basic as far as evading detection. But there's some great stuff you can do with PowerShell. Constrained language mode is a good example. And a good example of this is, why do regular users need access to PowerShell? Why? Does Bob in sales need access to PowerShell? No, but do developers need access to PowerShell? Possibly. But guess what? In group policy, you have access to software restriction policies, app blocker, or device guard, and you can put in permissions, hey, only these groups have access to PowerShell. Why do the rest of your user population need PowerShell? Makes no sense. And by the way, you need to block it in 2 locations, by the way. This is always commonly forgotten across the board when it comes to blocking PowerShell across your entire users. You'll block it in the normal System32 directory / Windows PowerShell / version 1.0 / PowerShell.exe. Obviously, you also block the PowerShell_ISE.exe. Those are 2 locations there. But people forget about 32-bit compatibility with in syswall64. And that's almost always used. That's used by Empire, it's used by Unicorn, it's used by Metasploit. It's C:\Windows /syswall64 / Windows PowerShell. That's also a secondary location you need to block when it comes to PowerShell exploitation. If you're not leveraging ETW, event log tracing for detection, I heavily recommend it. Sysmon, by the way, is a free tool for Microsoft and sysinternals, and they just released version 10.1. Well, it's actually version 10, and then they found a bug in 10.1. In 10.1, you now get DNS compatibility. So you can see all DNS lookups on your endpoints, which is great. DNS has always been a contention point for a lot of companies ingesting those logs. And what's great with Sysmon, if you're not familiar, is you have the ability to do rule sets. So exclude, include, and or operators, and you can basically create configuration files you can deploy to your enterprise to minimize the amount of information you're sending out there. If you're not familiar with ETW, it's kernel level event log tracing. So being able to see what's going on from user LAN interaction to kernel LAN to user LAN, and you can do a lot of great things around it. Mimikatz detection, lateral movement, living off LAN binaries and scripts detection. You can build all that and send it through to your infrastructure to then build a lot of correlation on. So a lot of good stuff around that. Detection, though, is one of those things that I'm a huge advocate of if you haven't been to any of my talks before, but being more proactive on detection. We'll get a little bit more into that in the future. As an industry, I really think that we purchase products to augment a poor security program. And what I mean by that is that I'm not saying products are bad, because products can give us visibility into our environments. Products can help enhance us. But products are a knee-jerk reaction to something that we probably already have in our environment today. We probably already have the ability to get logs. We probably already have the ability to have protection. We probably already have the ability to have visibility into our environment. But yet we implement something new because it sounds awesome. I did an analysis on a binary recently. It was a backdoored AES encrypted Python byte compiled executable. And I wrote this in 2012. It was just a proof of concept, and this is before Veil and everything else came out. I took some Python code, and I used PyDexe. It was malicious to byte compile it into an executable, and then evade antivirus detection. And at the time, during antivirus in 2012, antivirus would only scan a certain portion of the executable to see whether or not it's malicious. You didn't have a lot of the behavior analytics or large telemetry data pieces that you see today. And so in 2012, since 2012 to now, it's had over 1 million downloads, and it's an executable that's been the same hash. It hasn't changed since 2012, and I uploaded the virus total. And 6 out of the 60 plus antivirus vendors found it as malicious. And none of those were next generation AV ones, by the way. And so when you look at our tools and our capabilities, I always like to use the analogy of, let's just say you have a Cisco ASA, and your entire team for the past 10 years has used Cisco. And all of their institutional knowledge is in Cisco. And they're comfortable with Cisco, and you built all of your infrastructure off of Cisco, but yet there's this really cool Palo Alto that just came out. And it's amazing, right? It's next generation. It gives you all these features. What happens when you rip out an ASA that you have 10 years of knowledge in, and you pop in a Palo Alto? Let me ask you a question. Is anybody here not overworked? Not overworked? Not at all?
I would say no.
No, you're not overworked?
I would say yeah.
When it comes to our resources and complexity, when we introduce new complexity to an already overburdened staff and a new piece of technology that we have to learn to implement, that starts to become a problem. And so, I look at security programs as a way for us to address risk in our organization, and I look at it as we don't focus a lot on the strategy pieces. And so most of the time, tools used to fix a lack of leadership. Most organizations in general are still at the basics. And what I mean by that is that we might be doing really well with detection and a large emphasis on that. And I think the term threat hunting, by the way, is a really big fix for a massive problem that we've had in the industry for a very long time. And when I talk about that, you look at a traditional security operations center and you say, okay, we're going to buy a SIM, we're going to send all this data to the SIM, and then we're going to wait for that SIM to tell us what's going on. Now, I still haven't seen machine learning fix a security problem yet. All right, and I still haven't seen artificial intelligence that stops the hackers yet. Okay, believe me, I haven't gotten stopped by that product in any way, shape, or form. But when it comes to what we see, we're hoping that a correlation was written for an attack that we see out there. And most organizations' SIMs are at a bare, basic, minimum level playing field when it comes to looking for brute force attacks and other common things that are out there, or injecting into Symantec or McAfee and getting antivirus alarms. Now, if you look at what threat hunting does, which I'm a huge advocate of, it's being more proactive. It's going through command line auditing. It's going through PowerShell. It's looking at parent-child process relationships, which, by the way, can't emphasize enough how important understanding parent-child process relationships are within an organization. Why is WinWord or Excel.exe spawning a child process of command or PowerShell.exe? That is a vastly under-monitored area within an environment. And those are things that we can look for in our environment to comb through data to identify whether or not certain things are happening. But just a good example of that Bob in sales, if we can't block PowerShell across our environment, why is Bob in sales ever watching PowerShell or leveraging PowerShell in the first place? Those are things we should investigate and take a look at. For most organizations are the basic, and why threat hunting makes a big deal, is you're focusing more on the unusual behavior detection. It's not an alarm coming in. And here's the cyclical effect of a SOC, by the way. Alarm comes in, they review it, 99% of the time it's a false positive, they close it. When an actual item actually hits that's legitimately bad, it's a false positive. They think it's a false positive, they close that alarm, and then you miss it. Because you're already doing 99% of the false positives in the first place. What is different about this? And if you make it somewhat believable in some way, shape, or form, by the way, for anybody that is trying to get around a SOC, just make it look somewhat believable. Don't put a bunch of obfuscated code that beacons out to China. Just leverage a legitimate script that looks like it's going to like a business analytics site and downloads code from that way. You're never going to be picked up by an alarm. I guarantee you right to this day. You can even leverage HTAs, high content HTML files, as long as it says like employee survey. Or by the way, Amazon still leverages Amazon Web Services has an HTA fallback, so you can do like Amazon Web Services and make it the same file name as the Amazon Web Service. Use Google for the HTA name. And when someone goes to investigate that, it's going to be an Amazon Web Services extension. You're good. Make things look believable. Sorry for giving attackers different methods to go for. But anyways. When working with companies, it's interesting to see a lot of these basic attacks still working, common password issues, wide open networks, not leveraging network segmentation. Again, hard things that we have to implement. Number 2 on the list is tearing people down. I think that's a big one right now, and a lot of that is interesting. I like to look at Twitter. I don't get involved in Twitter fights anymore. I've gotten very savvy in my age around not actually like going and talking to people that continuously start fires in the security industry. But one thing that's interesting is that I'll look at what are the instigators of tearing other people down. And it's usually a very small group of people yelling at other people, or a troll account, by the way, that starts this. There'll be like a troll account that has nothing to do with information security, it's just a bunch of people talking smack on a shared account. And then it starts this massive Twitter debate where we're tearing down the industry about like, hey, we have to change everything that we're doing because this one troll account was going and trolling somebody, right? And interesting enough, as an industry, I think we are pretty accepting of everybody, regardless of who you are, regardless of where you come from, and that's been a short change over a short period of time. One thing that I saw that was really interesting for me is that, and maybe the red team had it coming, but if you look at the history around how we used to go into organizations and companies, the red team was always the mythical, magic sauce that would come in and do some magic stuff, and then all of a sudden we'd magically discover your vulnerabilities, and you'd magically fix those, and we'd magically do some other stuff later. And it was this back and forth, and we'd go into organizations, and we'd just burn them down, right? We'd go in and we just destroy them in every way, shape, or form, and then we'd say, listen, you have to fix all this stuff here, good luck. And then you'd walk out, and you'd be like, good luck, I'm going to do the same thing to you next year, because you're not going to fix half this stuff, right? And what would happen is the blue team would be like, oh my gosh, I'm doing all this stuff wrong. They're pointing out all this stuff is wrong, so it creates a little bit of an animosity between the red team and the blue team. And they didn't understand the specific attacks that are out there. And so nowadays it feels like it's cool to like rip on red team, like red team's nothing special. I saw one of my good friends had a slide that said, red team is nothing special. I disagree with that. I think the red team is special. I think the blue team's special. I think the purple teams are special. I think anybody that is in this industry working on a problem to fix is special. But what's different is that we're no longer an industry that goes in and smashes and destroys organizations and walks out. We are an industry now that works collaboratively with one another to try to figure out how we can stop specific techniques and attacks out there. And that's much different than the mindset that we had 10 years ago. So if you look at yesterday versus today, it's completely different of how we approach a lot of these. We actually work collaboratively with the blue team. We work collaboratively with the red team. There's that concept of purple teaming and being able to work together. All of those things are great and amazing things. And truth of the matter is, red and blue are way better together than they are anyway. I find so much as I'm going in and breaking into organizations, I'm working with the blue team, that I ever knew. Like, hey, I broke in this way. Oh, I saw you. And there's a good one of the folks that works at Trusted Sec on our red team. He got busted the other day for running IP config. And I'm like, that's actually fairly smart. And they're like, well, why would you flag on IP config? Wouldn't that give you a lot of false positives? And this company baseline their environment of, and they kind of categorize people into like technical, kind of technical, non-technical. All the non-technical people, if you run ipconfig, it immediately flags on you and says, listen, that person doesn't ever run ipconfig in their environment. That's unusual and weird. Got busted by an ipconfig. Completely harmless command. Same thing for like net user commands. Running a net user command over the domain. Probably not a good idea. Get picked up by those specific things because you're trying to enumerate users in the domain. So when you learn these things, you're like, oh, well, next time I need to make sure I don't run ipconfig, right? Or next time I don't run, net users, I use maybe API calls to go and pull that back versus actual command line auditing. So you learn more about how you can approach things in organizations when you work together. And that whole concept around ipconfig came from a red team exercise. They had a red team exercise performed, and they noticed that the attackers were continuously running command line arguments, and one of those commonly ones was ipconfig, so they could do subnet ranges, so they knew where they were at in the network, what system they were on, how they managed that, all those different things. And so I talked about this before, but it's not the same as 10 years ago as it is today. It's not the smash and grab. We're actually working to build a better place, which is great. And what's interesting is the term hacker doesn't just apply to red team, it applies to blue team as well. Everybody I know on the blue team is a hacker, whether it's hacking together firewall rules, or it's hacking together an operating system, or it's hacking together a network segment, or it's hacking together an understanding threat hunting or reverse engineering, or whatever it ends up being. We all are hackers in this industry. It's not just a hacker, red team, hacking into computer systems. It's everybody that works to make companies better. And so I mentioned this a little bit, but some of the common misconceptions too is that rock star mentality. And it's funny because I got the Cult of Dead Cows book sitting next to my bed right now, and I want to read it because those folks, you look at CDC and Loft and Shmoo and all the groups that kind of paved the way forward. I remember at DEF CON, I was in the military at the time, and they allowed me to go to Vegas, and it was I literally went to my first DEF CON the day I turned 21. Bad idea. Bad idea. I don't remember much. I really don't remember much, but I remember one presentation. I think that's all I can remember from DEF CON. I think it was like 9. And it was a Shmoo group on stage, and it was like Bruce Potter and all those awesome people. And they were on stage, and they had a UPS that they had gutted out and made into like basically a network tap. And so they used it on an assessment where they went into an organization, plugged in this UPS, and it basically harvested and did all the network packet analysis, sent it all back. And I'm like, man, these folks are the most amazing, awesome people in the world, and there's no way that I'm anywhere near as smart as them. And these guys are just like paving the way forward for everybody. And it was like one of the coolest experiences. But that mentality back then, you look at, and I was looking at when they released Back Orifice, right? And you're on stage, and you have literally people jamming to music and rock, and they're like rock stars on stage, right? Well, I hate to say this, but we're literally computer nerds, right? At least most of us are, right? Like, I play Destiny at home. I'm a video gamer, and I wouldn't like to say like I'm a rock star in any way, shape, or form. I don't go on stage and play guitar. I've tried to play guitar as much as I possibly can. It's just not in my genes. I sound horrible. I literally have 2 guitars. I've been to like millions of lessons over the years. But when it comes to that type of mentality, it's not that anymore. It's not the 18 years ago when the industry was new and it was magic and exciting. We've actually formalized as an industry to make the world a better place. It's awesome. And I think you'll hear later on in the keynote later today with Josh Corman, but like literally you got people like Josh that are trying to save people's lives with medical research, like actually save legitimate lives from people being hacked, and what you did with the Calvary movement and just security in general. I mean, all of those things are trying to make the world a better place when it comes to technology. And that's not a rock star mentality. That's, hey, we're trying to protect people. We're trying to help corporations. We're trying to promote our organizations to be able to conduct technology in a safe way, or to release a car that doesn't get driven off the road, or to be able to protect our critical infrastructure. All those are noble things that is much different than the industry today. Number 3, sharing and collaboration. Huge fan of this. I think we are probably one of the biggest industries that I've ever seen around sharing our own research. And we care about that. It's a part of our culture of where we came from. Actually sharing what we experience, sharing our knowledge, making it a better place, because we're trying to figure things out. You look at already established organizations like human resources, or let's just take the medical field as an example. You don't see a substantial amount of research and collaboration occurring all across the board to try to make the medical field a better place. Now, don't get me wrong, there are definitely studies and research groups and divisions that happen there. When it comes to our industry, I think we're one of the most oversharing industries out there, which is amazing. And that means that we're sharing things that work for us, sharing things that don't work for us, sharing things that could potentially impact things. I thought a really good testament to how far along we've come is look at 5 or 10 years ago when MS-0806.7 would have came out, or these different exploits. I would have published that in 2 seconds, not thinking about the ramifications or repercussions of it. Because it was a cool exploit. Like, I'm fascinated that, like, listen, all this code execution, we're able to hijack a portion of memory, take control of that execution flow, get code execution onto a system. All of a sudden now you completely circumvented all the Windows protection mechanisms, right? That's amazing. And that's how it was that many years ago. But you look at something like Bluekeep as a good example. And Bluekeep comes out, and there's a number of researchers that got working remote code execution. But did they publish their information? No. Because it was going to hurt people, right? There's 3 million systems still vulnerable on the internet today, literally exposed to the internet with Bluekeep still vulnerable. Is that responsible for us as an industry to release something like that? No. It's come a long way when it comes to collaboration and what we're doing. Some of these are great, by the way. If you, sharing collaboration, Daniel Bohannon, if you don't know, by the way, is a phenomenal researcher at the Flare team over at FireEye. Some of the things he posts is just awesome that he gets to see and find sometimes. And this is one of the ones that I thought was really neat. This is leveraging PowerShell without ever calling PowerShell. So your EDR products that are looking for somebody calling PowerShell, never going to see it because you're basically using 4 files to identify PowerShell and masking it in some way, shape, or form. This one's also great as well. A lot of people will look for PowerShell communicating out to the internet. Instead, leveraging CertUtil's download functionality, you can actually leverage CertUtil to go and download code from the internet and then execute PowerShell itself. So PowerShell never actually communicates out to the internet. So there's a lot of great ways to evade from that perspective, and just great things that you see. This is, obviously in the wild. A good indication of this, by the way, is any set commands on the command line are always a great one to take a look at. Any carets in the command line are great things to look at. And then any living off the land binaries or scripts beaconing out to the internet is always a great indication as well. So sharing of knowledge between the groups, we have all these different groups now, hopefully working together. And those are amazing things. Number 4, behavior. Now this is a big topic, and I don't have 4 hours to talk about this, unfortunately. I could talk literally for 4 hours on behavior. And this is one of the biggest things that I think concerns me about the security industry today. And it's having enough time and research to be able to identify new techniques or attacks that are being leveraged in the wild, and being able to spend time to go and do that. Does anybody here have 50% of your time dedicated to research or allowed? Do you able to do 50% of your research now? No? Okay. That's about what you need, unfortunately, to stay up with everything that's happening out there. There's a lot of different attack vectors occurring, and Jeff Moss, the guy that started Black Hat at DEF CON, he said something that really resonated with me last year during the introduction keynote to Black Hat before we opened up the keynote. And he said, as an industry, we talk so much about the tactics, techniques, and procedures of attackers. Everybody familiar with that term, tactics, techniques, and procedures, the TTPs, right? As an industry, we only focus on the techniques. We don't look at the tactics that attackers exhibit or the procedures that they operate by to build an understanding around how they work. So what happens today is that we see an attack, whether that's through an endpoint product, or it's from our threat intelligence, or whether it's from a previously discovered breach that occurred, a nation state that was hacking, a organized crime group, or a piece of malware that's new. And we get those indicators, whether it's in an actual type of technique that's being leveraged, maybe it's a command line, maybe it's a specific type of attack, maybe it's a hash value that we get in. And then we look at them and say, okay, let's build that into our detection. But if I modify or change that in some way, shape, or form, what happens? If I change just a little bit of it, what happens? Completely circumvents our detection. And so we're literally dealing with antivirus of the 90s today for what we're dealing with in the industry right now. And there's some things I'll talk about on this piece here. For me, visibility is number 1 in our environment. And I will say, and I say this in all my talks, you have to have endpoint logs. You have to be getting your endpoints. Have to. There's no debate anymore on whether or not you can do it, or whether your Splunk licensing will afford it because it jacks it up to $10 million a year. You have to have endpoint logs today. That's one of the most important areas of concern when it comes to compromises and the ability to understand that. So again, endpoint logs become really, really important. We look at some breach statistics. I thought this was interesting. If I would have looked at Dave in the 90s, and I would have said, Dave, how do you hack in the 90s? And I would say I don't hack because that's illegal. However, if hypothetically Dave was hacking in the 90s, right? I would say, well, I would somehow embed something into a document. I would get somebody to click on that document, and then I would download an executable, and then that executable would run the system, and then I would compromise that system. Then I'd use like sub 7 to like flip their screen upside down and enter their CD tray in and out, and that'd be like a ton of fun, right? And no one's ever done that, right? Especially your parents, right? Freaking them out. You hear like, what is going on with my CD-ROM drive? Like, right? But what's interesting is if you look at breach statistics today, a large percentage of them still are executables. It's still literally the hacking from the 90s. That's what we still struggle with in most of our organizations and companies, and it really comes from users. And what I mean by executables is that in some way, shape, or form, maybe PowerShell is being leveraged, maybe they're downloading a file, maybe it's inside of an embedded Word document or an Excel document. They go open it up, PowerShell executes, or VBScript executes, or a macro executes, it downloads an additional stage or a file, and it brings it down. I like looking at a group like Fin7, for example, which kind of away now, they're no longer there, a lot of them are in prison now, at least most of them. But with Fin7, I thought was really interesting. They came out with an RTF 0-day, rich text format 0-day. So it's a 0-day, which means it hasn't been discovered before, it's not in the wild, and no one's seen it before. They discovered it, and what that RTF did is you had the ability to do anything you wanted to because you had a 0-day. Like you literally could get code execution from an RTF. What do? They go and download an executable and execute on this machine. Because no one's stopping executables. Why would I need to change my tactics as an attacker if I can just use a 0-day and an executable to compromise 99% of the environments out there? That's why things like application whitelisting, by the way, and application control, huge advocate of, especially in user profile directories. If you can just block non-code sign executables in your environments, you literally shave down about 90% of your noise out there today, just by blocking non-code sign executables in your user profile directories. Big deal. So that's a big one. PowerShell 13%. I thought the number would be larger. I thought PowerShell would be a much larger attack surface, but why do I need to move as an attacker and change what I'm doing if I still have that high level of a clip in an organization to compromise? Living off the land, binaries and scripts. If you're not familiar with these, and this is actually my favorite area of research. There's about 74 or so one of these living off land, binaries and scripts so far, and there's a whole bunch more that are undocumented that aren't even published out there. And what these are is it works in OS X, it works in Windows, and it works in Linux. And as an operating system, operating systems are code, right? It's not magic. It didn't magically appear from like aliens or things like that. People actually had to write code, and that code actually runs applications. And those applications have functionality that they perform. Like for example, calc.exe is a calculator, right? lsas.exe runs certain functions and protects your certain pieces of memory, and it has functions for logging in cryptography and for password management and things like that. Explore.exe, winware.exe, you have all of these applications that provide a specific function in your operating system. Same thing on OS X and Linux. With living off land binaries and scripts, what attackers have figured out is that, listen, even if you're leveraging code signing, application control or application whitelisting, you still have all of these binaries that we know are going to be there in every way, shape, or form. And think about 5 or 10 years ago, we knew that everybody had Office documents, right? We knew that everybody had Java installed. We knew that everybody had Adobe installed. And so a lot of the exploits that you saw targeted those because we knew on the endpoints, we mostly have code execution on those systems. Well, living off land binaries and scripts, we know that every platform has these binaries, these applications that are on there. So can we abuse those applications? And so there's about 72, 73 of these different binaries and scripts that are code signed by Microsoft or for Apple or Linux. They're code signed, which means that they get around your application control and application whitelisting, right? And they have additional functionality built into it that allow you to go and download things from the internet and execute into memory, to have their proxy aware. So if you have proxies in place, they allow you to go and download code and execute it and bypass all of your current restriction mechanisms. So a couple of these that are my favorite. Reg SVR32 is probably my number one, and that's one that's commonly used by a lot of the different crimeware associations and things like that. But Reg SVR32 is proxy aware. You can go out to the internet, it can download a scriptlet, and it can execute that code. Great functionality built into Windows, and there's a whole bunch of these out there today, and that's where a lot of the research is going into right now. Interesting enough, from a timing perspective, at Binary Defense we analyzed about 3,900 different breaches, and what we wanted to see from that is how long did it take from one system to compromise to move out to other systems, so that lateral movement and post-exploitation. And as an industry, that's where we want to be at, is getting the early warning signs, right? I think we've advanced to say, listen, attackers can circumvent our protection, right? I think that's possible, right? Would everybody agree does anybody here think that their protection is 100% good, right? No. So as an attacker, if I'm a good level of skill, I can get around some basic products or some basic EDRs, I can get code execution into the system and not be detected. When that occurs, how long does it take to bridge out and branch out to other locations in our network? And let's just say Bob and Sales gets compromised. Great. Okay, we don't really care as an organization if Bob and Sales gets compromised. Bob's probably not going to be happy, but it's not going to be the entire downfall of an entire organization. what happens when you move to the next system so they get access to our databases, or our credit card information, or intellectual property, or things that actually house us sensitive. And so, on average, it's about 2 hours, so about 1.43 hours on average, from one system become compromised to move out to another system. And so that's not a lot of time that we have to be able to respond to specific things, and that's a major problem. So if an attacker customizes anything at all, they largely go undetected. I'm going to give you an example of this. I recently did, so I wrote a tool called Magic Unicorn. I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with it. Appreciate it, thank you. Now what happened with Unicorn that was interesting is that for 5 years, it's been out for 5 years, or 6 years now, 6 years. It's been out for 6 years. For 5 years, Unicorn never got picked up by anything at all whatsoever. But then it got so much popularity, people were leveraging all the time, that all the antivirus vendors were like, oh, I should be focusing on this. And so one of the big ones that people have been focusing on is Windows Defender. Windows Defender, Microsoft loves me, and not really, they love focusing on Unicorn. And what's interesting about that is that at the same time I wrote Unicorn, I wrote a separate version of Unicorn that I was just kind of messing around with different features. And I never changed it. So from 5 years ago to now, I never changed this code. That one that I never published doesn't get picked up by anything whatsoever out there. The one that I released that gets hundreds of thousands of downloads does get picked up. Now what's interesting is that with Windows Defender, they're literally releasing signatures probably every 2 weeks or so for Unicorn. Now what I did is I'm like, okay, well, let's take a look at how they're actually writing signatures, and is it easy for me to bypass? And this whole, you talk about DevOps, I've mastered DevOps in Unicorn, by the way. I've automated myself, and this is actually where I actually have a robot basically doing my work for me. And so what happens on an hourly basis is I have a machine that goes and checks out for new Defender signatures and looks to see whether or not Unicorn gets flagged. If it gets flagged, it then tears apart Unicorn and chunks it up until it finds the location of where it's actually getting. And I've actually built in an interpreter for PowerShell and Python syntax, and it automatically rewrites the code for me. And then it submits a pull request. And then it checks it over builds to make sure that it actually works and it still gets a shell back, and all I gotta do is approve it once the build pass. It's really tough for me, right? Now that took me like 4 hours to write, so I'm gonna say, like, listen, it took me some time to write, but I wanna show you and give you an example of how easy it is to circumvent this. So let's do a demo here. So I'm gonna run Unicorn here. If I could hit, computers are hard. Why is that not playing? Oh my God, it's locking up. Oh, I got the wheel. Oh, I got the wheel. Here we go. Okay, wait, it's going. Oh no, the wheel again.
Wait, that's a Mac, right?
It's a video. How does a video demo fail?
On a Mac.
It's like I'm not even doing a live one.
Thought Macs don't break.
I'm gonna mirror this to see what happens. Oh my gosh. I can't even hit end show. It's completely locked up. It was a really cool demo too, let me just tell you. Let me... Boo.
Use a video, you won't have any problem.
Yeah, no, like, hey, make sure you use a video. And I actually almost never do videos, by the way, because I like doing it live. And I'm actually notorious for, like, if there's a bug in the middle of it, I'll actually fix it while I'm actually giving the demo. All right, let's see if this works. There we go. Okay. It hasn't moved yet, so I don't think that's actually working. It's actually not working. Seriously. It got this spin again. It's spinning. All right, hang on a second. Hang on. How did the demo fail in a video?
VPN in.
Just open the video directly.
Yeah, I'll do that. 1 second. I'm gonna remove this so you don't see my folders. There's a lot of weird stuff in there. All right.
Clown pictures.
It's a lot of clown pictures.
Small ones.
I don't understand how a video demo fails. Like, I just don't get it. Out of all the things that fail. Like, literally, my whole computer's not even... All right, you know what? I'm going to reboot and I'm just going to talk. And I can't even find the power button. There we go. Okay. So while this reboots for my video demo, What's interesting with AMSI, and to talk a little bit about how AMSI works. Windows added AMSI, anti-malware scan interface, to Windows 10 and to Server 2012 R2. And what's interesting with AMSI is it's essentially a way, Microsoft had a really big problem when it came to visibility. Scripts, for example, VB scripts, PowerShell scripts, weren't being scanned by Windows Defender. And so what would happen is you could still technically scan them, but they would be heavily encrypted or encoded, and you didn't have a good understanding around what was actually occurring. So with Windows 10, Windows released AMSI. And what it does is it injects what's called AMSI.dll into a process that is running. So let's just say excel.exe. And when you go to execute code, AMSI then has two function types that are important, AMSI scan buffer and AMSI scan string. What will happen is it'll submit that code, if there's any scripting languages in there, like PowerShell or not, it'll submit it to AMSI, and right before it's actually going to run in the PowerShell interpreter or whatever you're running as your scripting language, it will scan it to see whether or not it's malicious. And what that means is if you're leveraging encoding or encryption or things like that, it'll be in essentially its rawest form possible to be able to scan those different things. There's been so many different bypasses out for AMSI, by the way, because AMSI.dll is running under the context of a user account. So as a user, you can just unload that DLL. As a user, you can just patch that portion of memory and say, listen, don't even scan my portion of memory because I don't want you to scan my portion of memory because you're a user and I'm a user and I'm the boss. There's also a new technique that came out just last week that I thought was really interesting. And if you look at what are called egg hunters, this is an old technique that I used to use back in my heavy exploitation days. And what egg hunters do is, in certain portions of memory, you don't necessarily know where you're at, especially when you're dealing with what's called ASLR, address space layout randomization. It randomizes memory addresses so that an attacker doesn't know how far in a memory space you are. And so with ASLR, what you do, or with egg hunters, what you do is you inject your bad code into memory somewhere, and you use an egg hunter that searches for like a common pattern of your code to say, where are you in memory? And a lot of times you do like woot or things like that. You look for woot across your entire memory space, and then you find it and you know what your memory addresses are. So then you can kind of predict where you're at. And so someone recently just did a proof of concept where they leveraged unload DLL now, which you can get with your bat tables, and basically call a DLL to be unloaded. And then they used an egg hunter to enumerate where the AMSI.dll process space was, and then it just unloads that DLL in memory and doesn't actually scan you in the first place, which is great, right? So there's a lot of ways to get around AMSI, but my argument is, why even worry about that when AMSI and the detection that we use today are still super trivial? So with Unicorn, I don't worry about patching AMSI in memory, because what happens is new signatures come out for that new patch. Literally, that's what they do. They look at the blog post that a researcher made, like, oh, there's like 5 predictable patterns in here, we're going to write a signature off of that. But if you modify it, change it, get around it, that's fine. But that technique we're going to try to block, okay? So in this one, with AMSI, I'm actually going to circumvent AMSI, and it's really difficult, it's really tough to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to generate an interpreter shell, which is very commonly used by attackers and the community, right? It's a very publicly known backdoor. We're going to generate the code. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to decode it in its raw sense, so it's already in a decoded form. I'm going to post it over here into the PowerShell interpreter to run, and it's going to get picked up by AMSI. So I'm just base64 encoding it and everything else. And I'm going to decode this. And here's my code, and I use like some interesting techniques in here. I use like substitution variables because Defender used to flag off of very specific byte codes into interpreter. So like for example, look for like 0x, 0d, 0x, 0f, 0x, 1c. If those 3 are in a row, then trigger antivirus, okay? But if you just say, listen, take basic shellcode and replace it with a random character, it doesn't get picked up anymore, okay? Real difficult. Substitution replacements. In this case, we're going to paste this over here. We're going to hit play, and it should trigger a warning down here if my video demo doesn't die again. And I'm going to launch my interpreter. And we see here, it's a little bit blurry, but you can see here that it got picked up by AMSI. The anti-malware scan interface said this is a malicious script. I'm going to do something really sophisticated here. Now, what my tool does for me automatically is it knows what the PowerShell language is, syntax variables, replace variables, and things like that, and it splits it up automatically for me to identify which portion of the actual code is actually getting flagged. And then from there, it'll automatically rewrite that portion for me based on usable syntax within PowerShell, and then submit the pull request. But in this case here, this is from a couple weeks ago, it's like 2 weeks ago. All I did was, this is what's called invoke expression, or IEX. So this is invoke expression. It's saying invoke expression, and then use the rest of this code to place shell code directly into memory in the PowerShell process is essentially what's occurring. So if I remove this, if I just cut it out, and I hit play again, notice here I don't get flagged by antivirus. So now we need to figure out a way to get around antivirus. So what if I just take this code here, I copy it, and I say A equals this code, and I invoke expression, make A, and then I hit play. Wow, right? That's where I say, hey. I don't even feel cool doing this. Like, it's not even, anyways. What sucks is like I got this cool folder in Linux called Cool Stuff, and it's like cool stuff that I want to release that I think is like really awesome, like new tools, like new ways of like breaking into stuff. But I don't have to release it yet because all the other stuff works. Like so, I'm just waiting. I got like 3 years worth of cool stuff, and so it's like a new version. Like we have a version of Unicorn now called Sweetcorn. And uses advanced encryption standard and gzip deflation to get remote code execution. All fits within one line, which is awesome. It fits within the 2191 character restriction length of PowerShell. And that's been working for years, by the way, as a way to ensure that you don't get picked up by antivirus. I want to release that. I think it'd be cool, but I haven't had a need to, so we just use it internally for now until someday I don't have to use 8 equals 1 and different variable name, then you're all set. So I wish we can get better at detection, and that's one of the big things that if you look at where we're at today at detection, what happens today in the process flow for all these companies that tout next generation AV or artificial intelligence or machine learning, what they do is they essentially send a substantial amount of telemetry data back to corporate, okay? Whether it's an EDR product or whether it's Microsoft. Microsoft, by the way, sends so much data back to mothership, it's insane. I don't know how that is even cool with us, but it's fine. A lot of data. Lots and lots and lots. Even when you turn it off, lots and lots and lots of data. And so what happens with that is they send all this data back, and it's very invasive, by the way. Even if you turn off Windows Defender, it nags you, it tries to submit it automatically. There's a lot of weird things that it does. And what will happen is it'll send all this telemetry data back, and they essentially have a whole army of people writing signatures. That's their machine learning. They have a bunch of people going through a bunch of data to write a bunch of signatures, then push it out so that they're protected against the stuff that they've already seen in the wild. So it's kind of like when you upload a piece of malware to virus tool. What do you expect, right? A lot of things. So that's a big one. Number 5 is leadership and communication buy-in. I think when you look at security programs and why they fail, it's not because there isn't passionate people trying to do the right thing around security. It's getting the buy-off to get the things to actually get things done. And whether that's the organization as a whole, or whether that's your direct leadership, there has to be a balance between what you do in security. When I worked at Diebold, the reason I took the position, for one, is there was a guy that was my mentor in life. Like this guy, I can attest to why I can actually talk in front of audiences. I remember the first time when I got in the military, I joined a small consulting shop, and his name is Scott Angelo. Scott Angelo was there, and I went to and presented at it was an ISACR and ISSA event here. And those types of events are mostly higher level folks, right? And they're not very technical in a way, and that's fine. It's a different type of conference. And I get there, and this is in like 2005, and I'm talking about like WPA packet sniffing. I got my antenna there, and I'm actually cracking WEP, and I'm cracking WPA, and I'm doing all this stuff. And these folks like all in suits are like, what the hell is going on here, And one thing I attest to communication was Scott, and I went over to Diebold, and it was an interesting one because I worked with people, and the first thing I did when I got to Diebold wasn't patching systems or implementing a SIM or anything like that. It was buying people beer and pizza so I could be friends with them to get things done. And what was interesting with that is that as a leader, I remember Scott Shaver, who works at Binary Defense for me right now, I went over to Scott, I'm like, hey man, this is taking too long, this one project, I need to get it done. And he's like, well, what's the project? He's like, the reason it's taking so long is because this is a really big deal and it's probably gonna down our entire company. And I'm like, but I really want to get it done. I'm like, here's some beer and pizza. Like, that's not going to work on me. So I had to go to the next network engineer, Mark Kirk at the time. I'm like, Mark, listen, I need you to find an RFC to tuck this under somehow, because it's taking too long. And I'm like, listen, I got your back. Don't worry about it, but we need to get done. And what it was is at the time before Cisco acquired them was ScanSafe. And ScanSafe allows you to do what's called proxy chaining, which allows you to eliminate essentially 80443, which are common protocol methods for command and control infrastructure. And so what you can do is you can basically proxy chain all of your proxies out another port, out of your organization, and then filtered by ScanSafe, and then out to the rest of the internet. It's a really great concept. And so what my whole goal was to block 8443 across my entire company, period. Across a global company, 77 countries, 22,000 employees, overnight. That's what I wanted to do, right? And so Mark's like, listen, this is going to be bad, but as long as you got my back and the beer and the pizza, I think we're good. And so he put that sweeping change in across our entire organization. We blocked 8443 overnight. Now, interesting enough, there were bad things that happened. I don't know why. That's weird. That's weird. That's weird. I don't understand why our manufacturing plant shut down completely to where we couldn't produce ATMs at the time. I don't know why that happened. But they used a pairing process for the TPM to basically pair and put a certificate on TPM, and it broke that whole process. So once we put an exception, it was fine, but we lost 2 days of manufacturing, which is a big deal, right? And so I remember being in a room, and there's a bunch of angry people, and I didn't even I took the heat for that, and I'm like, listen, we did this to protect the organization, and I was really good friends with the CEO and our CFO and our board and everything, so I had a lot of power behind me to be able to do those types of sweeping changes, but I had everybody's back. And leadership is an important part when it comes to these types of changes, because you have to change culture and people. You have to change ways that we've done before aren't the ways that we need to do it now. And it takes time, and it takes a lot of relationship building to go and do that. And if you don't have strong leaders in place, and I'm not saying I'm a strong leader, but that's just an example of having people's backs to trust that when you go and do something, that they're not going to get in trouble. And that's really, really important. And my advice to you is, if you can't make a change in the company, you're just beating your head every single day. We are at a net deficit in this industry when it comes to employee population. I know moving sucks. Moving to different organizations suck, especially if it's not the great place that you want to work. It's a family burden, it's a lot of other things. But move to a different company where you can make a change. There are companies out there that just won't change. They don't care about security. They don't care that they're going to get breached. They'll react afterwards. If we get ransomware, we'll pay it. We don't care about it's not going to happen to us. That's fine. Try to make your difference in that and change that culture, but if you can't, you need to move on. So closing up here, 5 things that are most important to me, right? The basics: being kind to one another, being awesome to one another, being accepting of one another, knowing that we're not any better than anyone else out here. Just because I'm up here speaking doesn't mean I have different experiences than you. Share your experiences. Your experiences of what you deal with on a regular day-to-day basis is unique to you, and that's awesome. You figure out a way to do something different than somebody else has in their own situations. Share that. Sharing and collaboration. Number 3. Excuse me. Behavioral, instead of looking at what your tools rely off of you on. And 5, leadership is really important. One thing I'll say in closing is that, and I'm really very fortunate to be here with all of you, and that you all came early on a Saturday, by the way, to hear me talk. Hopefully you didn't waste your time. But when it comes to this industry, I'm really blown away by all of the amazing people that are in this industry. People new, people that have been here for a long time, people that have different experiences that they share on a given basis. Men, women, race, it doesn't make a difference. We're all working together for one common goal to really try to make the world a better place, and that is absolutely incredible. And I'll tell you, the most brilliant minds I've ever met here. I remember one day I went and talked to H.D. Moore, who was like my idol growing up for Metasploit. I remember using Metasploit 2. Funny story about this, Metasploit 2 had just come out. It was all Perl, which I don't sorry. Even people that write good, clean code of Perl looks like garbage code that was all, no offense to anybody here. Also, Nano is greater than BI. I heard a couple people clap, but it was funny because I was using Metasploit, and I remember I was working for an energy company. It was during the time around the major hurricanes that were happening, and I can't remember where it was at, but there was like a lot of major hurricanes happening. They actually had to shut down power. And I remember I ran an exploit. It was like an MS-03 plug-and-play vulnerability at the time. And I ran it against this machine called Grid. And I'm on this machine called Grid. I got remote code execution. And all of a sudden, Grid stops responding. And I'm like, that's not good. And I asked my contact, I'm like, hey, like what's the naming schema for like really critical infrastructure in your environment? They're like, oh, it's grid underscore blah blah blah. Like, we don't touch those systems. I'm like, oh. It's one of those ones you're like, do you say something? Do you not say something? Like, oh shit. Like do I actually tell them? And I'm like, listen, I gotta be honest with you. I didn't know grid was off of this. You didn't tell me, by the way. Grid stopped responding over here, and they're like, what? You know, and they ended up shutting the whole infrastructure down over there because of the hurricane. So it wasn't me that did it. Thank God. But dude, you have no idea how much you sweat in those situations. Like I was like dripping in sweat. I'm like, do I tell? What do I do? Anyways, you know, but I remember meeting HD and just being fascinated by how his brain worked, about just meeting new people in the industry, coming about how their brain worked or how they want to start into the industry. It's an amazing place. I'm really, really impressed with everybody here. So let's give a round of applause for everybody here in this room. Being part of BSides, being part of the community, being part of the industry. And so let's go off from this keynote and continue to make the world a better place. Whether you're working in a small mom and pop pizza shop, thank you for protecting my pizza as it's being delivered. I enjoy pizza. All the way to Fortune 5 and Fortune 1000 companies or DoD contracts and the folks that are in our service, people in Cyber Command, people that are focusing on protecting our nation.